All right, so this is our last week talking about ICD-10. This is going to go over chapters 16 through 22. So we're going to talk about perinatal conditions, congenital conditions, signs and symptoms, injuries, so your burns, your fractures, things along those lines. And then we'll also talk about external causes a little bit and Z codes and all that stuff. Okay. So let's start out with number one. We have an 18-day-old infant that develops bradycardia. So how are we going to look this up in the alphabetic index? We're going to look up main term bradycardia. Once we get to main term bradycardia, underneath you have neonatal. So what is our ICD-10 code for neonatal bradycardia? Yep, P29.12. Yep. And then we'll go verify that in our alphabetic or in the tabular. I keep saying that backwards. I've been doing that all week. So P29.12 in the tabular. And that is just neonatal bradycardia. Okay. Any any questions on number one? Okay. So number two, we have an X-ray is performed for pain in the left little finger. The initial, or this is the initial encounter for the visit. The X-ray report shows that there is a fractured distal phalanx that is located or dislocated. So what is our main term? Somebody wants to pop it in the chat. What is the main term we will look up? Okay. So they are coming in for the pain, Sylvia, but we do have an actual diagnosis after they did an X-ray. So we're going to only code our definitive diagnosis. So we're going to code the fracture. Okay. Is this going to be considered a pathological fracture or a traumatic fracture? Traumatic. Yep. Pathological is going to be a fracture that's due to a disease. So yes, we'll go to fracture. Our anatomic location is the phalanx. Does anybody know where the phalanx is located? Yep, so it's going to be the finger. So it actually tells us if we go to fracture phalanx, it tells us to go to fracture and then finger. And then underneath finger, the rest of our anatomic location. What is your ICD-10 code that we need to go further expand in the alphabetic index or in the tabular? See, I knew I did it again. What code do we need to expand in the tabular per the alphabetic index? So you'll go fracture, finger, and then distal phalanx. It's S62.63. Yep. So let's go back to S62.63. And then our sixth character is going to be for the laterality, and the finger itself. So what is our sixth character for the left distal phalanx? I'm sorry, the left little finger of the distal phalanx. Okay. That's the left index finger. Number 1 is the left index finger. So we're looking at the little finger instead of the index finger. Okay, so puny, you'll go to fracture and then finger. And then underneath finger, you're going to look at distal phalanx. And it should give you the F62.63. So yeah, needy, it is S62.637. So 7 is going to give us our left little finger. And then we need to find our the seventh character. So we need to go back to the S62 category. All right, puny, what's your question, hon? Make sure you come off mute.
So when I look into fracture, I see a finger as M84.44.
You are under pathological. You need to be under traumatic.
So
'Cause
under fracture, okay.
a pathological fracture is going to be a fracture that's due to a disease, whereas a traumatic fracture is going to be something that is like a traumatic break, right? There was something that caused that break to happen. It typically is going to be an injury.
Okay, I see that now. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So we have S62.637, and then we need to go back to the beginning of our S62 category to find our seventh character. What is our seventh character for this scenario? A. Yep, because we have an initial encounter for a closed fracture. Okay. Any questions on the left little finger fracture of the distal phalanx that is dislocated? Okay. Number 3, we have a patient that's seen for an initial replacement of a leaking dialysis catheter. So what do we think our main term is going to be for this scenario? So we have a leaking dialysis catheter. Because if we use dialysis or catheter, those are going to be procedures, right? But if that dialysis catheter is leaking, yep, it's going to be considered a complication. So you'll go to main term complication. And then it is a complication of the catheter. You have a couple pages of complications. So you'll go down to catheter, and then you'll see that you have a couple different options of different types of catheters. So we have cranial catheters, cystostomy catheters. Here we're looking at a dialysis catheter because they tell us that it's specifically a dialysis catheter. And then you will go to, it's a mechanical complication, right? There's not a embolism or a hemorrhage or anything around the catheter. It's a mechanical complication because of the leakage. And then underneath mechanical, you'll go to leakage. And that gives us what? T82.43. Yep. Let's go back in the tabular at T82.43. We know we're going to have to expand it out, but let's see how far we have to expand it. So T82.43, and it tells us we require a 7th character. So where are we going to find our appropriate 7th characters for T82.43? It's going to be at our T82 category. So what is our 7th character for the T82.43? A. Yep. Because it's our initial encounter, because it's an initial replacement for the leaking catheter. So T82.43 is for leakage of a vascular dialysis catheter, and then initial encounter letter A. Any questions on that one? Okay. Number 4, we have a patient has an open, dislocated, or I'm sorry, displaced sunburst fracture of the second cervical vertebrae. It is going to be her 5th visit, and the fracture is healing normally. So our main term is going to be fracture because that is the condition. Underneath fracture, we're going to go to neck because that's where our cervical vertebrae are. So make sure again we're under traumatic because they did not indicate that it was a pathological fracture or it was due to a disease. Underneath neck, we'll go to cervical. And then it is the second cervical vertebrae. And it is displaced. So what is our code that we're going to go further expand? Now, if we go to just the second, we need to go a little bit further down into an indentation because they told us what type of fracture it is. What type of fracture do we have? No, it's not an open. They didn't indicate that it's an open fracture. Or sorry, they did. Sorry, they did. I was thinking of a different word. What is the other type of type of fracture? Not necessarily open versus closed, but what is the type of fracture that they indicated was present? Nope, not displaced. It's after the word displaced. Sunburst. Yep. So sunburst fracture is going to be a specific type of fracture. So what is our code that we're going to verify in the back? Yep, S12.190. So you'll go underneath specified type. So let's go to S12.190. So S12.190 is other displaced fracture of the second cervical vertebrae. So that gives us for the displaced sunburst fracture of the second cervical vertebrae. What is our seventh character for this situation? Yep, letter D for subsequent encounter for fracture with routine healing. So it's S12.190D. Any questions on that one? Okay. Go on to number 5. So we have a patient is admitted to surgery to treat an open fracture of the shaft of the right humerus, and then a simple closed fracture of the left tibia following a side-by-side ATV accident. So we have two separate fractures. We have an open fracture of the right humerus. We have a simple closed fracture of the left tibia. And then we also need to code our side-by-side ATV accident. So we have 3 separate codes for this scenario. So let's look at our open fracture of the shaft of the right humerus first. We'll go to fracture. Again, this is a traumatic fracture because it was following an accident. Our anatomic location is the humerus. And then it is of the shaft. So what code are we going to further expand in the alphabetic index? We go fracture, humerus, shaft. Does anybody see it? Fracture underneath traumatic. Humerus is our location. And then shaft. Yep, S42.30. Let's go take a look at the S42.30. And then we need our sixth character for laterality, which is going to be what? Yep, number one. So S40.30, S42.301. And then what's our seventh character for this one? Okay. Is it a closed fracture? So for the humerus, it's not a closed fracture. It's going to be an open fracture. So we have a separate seventh character for an open fracture that's the initial encounter. Letter B. Yep. So you'll go to the beginning of your S42 category and we'll find our seventh character B for the initial encounter for an open fracture. Does everybody see that? Do you see that, Needy? Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure since you had said the wrong one, I wanted to make sure that you did see where the correct one came from. Perfect. Okay. So now we're going to look at the fracture of the tibia. So we'll go back to fracture. And then this time we're going to go to tibia. Underneath tibia, can we go anywhere else in an indentation, or are we going to use the default code? Did they give us any detail that we can go further down into an indented code, or are we going to use the default code? What code do you think we'll use? So fracture tibia. Yep, we're going to use our default code. So what is our default code for a fracture of the shaft of the tibia? S82.20. Okay. So let's look at S82.20, further expand it. So what is our code for laterality? And then our seventh character. S82.20. So we need our sixth character for laterality. What's our sixth character for laterality? 2. And then our seventh character for a closed fracture is A. So the full valid code is S02 I'm sorry, S82.202A. Okay. So now comes the fun part, right? Now we're going to talk about the external causes. So we're going to use our separate index for our external causes. Those are located after your table of drugs and chemicals. So it was following an ATV accident, a side-by-side ATV. So in our external causes index, you're going to go to main term accident. An ATV is considered a transport vehicle. So you'll go to transport. Underneath transport, you'll go to all-terrain vehicle because that's what ATV stands for. Underneath all-terrain vehicle occupant. Then we're going to go to specified type because they told us what type of ATV is. It's a side-by-side ATV. And then does our scenario indicate whether they are the driver, the passenger, or outside of the ATV? So it doesn't indicate. So we're just going to go, well, the side by side is the type of ATV, but does it indicate if they are the driver, the passenger, or they were outside of the ATV? Right. So it does not. So we'll just use our default code, the V86.99. We'll go back in our tabular to V86.99. And then it tells us we need that seventh character. So what's our seventh character for the V86.99? Yep, A, because it's our initial encounter. So it's going to give us option C as our answer. Let me get the rest of these highlighted that correlate with each one of the codes. 202. Okay, Puny, what's your question, hon?
So from accident, how did you went to the default codes? I saw that vehicle is there, but I mean, how did you
So
went
you
to
go
see?
to accident and then transport because an
Okay,
ATV is a transport vehicle. Underneath transport, you'll go to all-terrain vehicle because that's what an ATV stands for, is all-terrain. Underneath the all-terrain, it tells us what side or what type of ATV it is. It's that side by side. So that's going to be a specified type.
okay.
And then because they did not indicate that they were the driver, the passenger, or they were located outside of it, they just said that it just happened with an accident. Then we would just use our default code because they don't tell us enough detail to say whether it was the driver or the passenger. You're welcome. Any questions on number 5? Your external causes can get tricky. When we're talking about fractures, remember that we're looking at the correct anatomic location. We're looking at the correct type of fracture and then the correct encounter. So remember your encounters, your initial encounter doesn't mean it's the first time that they're being seen. Your initial encounter actually means that it's just active treatment. So you can have multiple initial encounters as you are having active treatment throughout the injury. Okay. So with fractures, you can have multiple initial encounters as you are actively having treatment to treat that fracture. So the emergency department visit would be your first initial encounter. When you go to the orthopedist for evaluation, it would be your second initial encounter because they're actively treating it. Once they have surgery or they do, whatever treatment they're going to do, at that point, that's going to be a third initial encounter because we're still in the active treatment phase. Once we put a cast or strapping or whatever after the treatment itself, then you go into what's known as the healing phase, and that's your subsequent visits. So as they're not actively treating anything, they're just waiting and they're seeing how it heals. That's going to be your subsequent visits. Okay. So don't confuse initial encounter with first visit versus your second visit. Okay. So think A equals active treatment. And then your subsequent is going to be your healing phase. Okay. Let's take a look at number 6. So a patient has a mass on his forehead. He says that it's from a piece of sheet metal from a laceration to his forehead months ago. He does have an x-ray showing a foreign body that's in the mass. After obtaining consent, that metal fragment foreign body is removed from the subcutaneous tissue. So what do we think we're going to code from here? If you want to come off of mute, you can. What do you think we're going to code in this situation? The foreign body. Okay. So we do have a foreign body located in his forehead. Okay. So let's go take a look at that. Let's go look at foreign body. Underneath foreign body, you'll go to retained because it is a foreign body that has been there for a while. So it's a retained foreign body, meaning it's an old foreign body that's kind of been in that tissue. Underneath retained, then we will go to fragments because it is a fragment, it's a piece of sheet metal. So that's considered a fragment. And that actually sends us somewhere else. It tells us to see something else. It says see retained foreign body fragments. So we'll go to main term retained. Does everybody see that where it's telling us to go see that retained entry? So it's a retained foreign body and it is fragments. And it is of metal. So what is our code for that retained fragment of metal? Z18.10. Correct. Does everybody see Z18.10 for that foreign body or that retained foreign body fragment of metal? Okay. Go back and look at the Z18.10. Let's see what our code description is for that code. In Z18.10, Xenia, I figured that's what you meant. Yeah. I know it's easy to hit the wrong numbers when you're typing. So Z18.10 is retained metal fragments unspecified. Okay. So we've got the foreign body. We're saying that it is the piece of sheet metal. What else do you think we'll code? Well, the removal is going to be our CPT code. We're only coding our ICD-10s, the conditions themselves. So we have a healed laceration, right? That contains the mass that contains that foreign body, right? So we need to code the laceration. And it's going to be considered a sequela because it's going to be a late effect. So we're not going to be in the healing phase. We're not going to be in the treatment phase of the laceration. It's going to be the sequela because it happened months ago and it's healed. So we'll go to main term laceration. Underneath laceration, you'll go to forehead. And then there is a foreign body. So what is that code that it gives us? S01.82. Yep. So let's go back to S01. .82. And then it's telling us that we need a seventh character. So again, what's our seventh character going to be from the laceration to his forehead months ago that has that foreign body? Yep, S, because it's that sequela, that late effect. Okay. So the last code that we need is actually going to be another foreign body code. Okay. So we're going to go to foreign body. So we have the Z18.10 that's telling it's a metal fragment, right? But we need to kind of know where that metal fragment was. So we'll go to foreign body, and then you'll go to N and then soft tissue. So the M79.5, right? So the M79.5 is telling us that there is a foreign body within the soft tissue. So that's telling us what that mass is there, and that mass contains that foreign body. Okay, so that should be our primary code because that's what brought them in, right? The mass, including in this, or the mass within the soft tissue that includes a foreign body. And then we need to know how that mass or how that foreign body got there. So that's going to be the laceration, which is the sequela code. And then we need a code to indicate what that foreign body is that's located in the soft tissue. So we kind of looked them up out of order, right? The first code that we should have looked up was that foreign body within the soft tissue of the forehead. And then we would have said, okay, how did it get there? It got there because of that laceration that happened months ago. And then what is located? It's a metal fragment that is there. So Xenia, it's not going to be mass, is not going to be your main term. Your main term is going to be that foreign body in the soft tissue. It just so happens that there's a mass around that foreign body. But because we have that foreign body is the result of the mass, then the mass is no longer coded because we know the cause of the mass. So kind of like think of it as your mass is a sign or symptom. And then our definitive diagnosis is that foreign body in the soft tissue. We need to know how it got there. And then we need to say what that foreign body is. Okay. Does that make sense now? I know this one's a little confusing. The first couple times that I saw this one, and like I really had to think about it. So this one can get a little confusing. That's why I wanted to use this one as a good example tonight, is so that you can see how even though you think that the M79.5 for the foreign body and the Z18.10 are telling us the same thing, but they are truly telling us two separate things. One is telling us that there's a mass in the foreign body, and then the Z code is telling us what the mass is that's present. Or not, I'm sorry, not the mass, the foreign body that's present in the soft tissue. And then the Z code is telling us what the foreign body is that's located in the soft tissue. So kind of think of it as the M79.5 is saying there's something there, and the Z code is telling us what is there. Okay. We've done a couple, no, let's do this one, nursemaid's elbow. So a 4-year-old is brought into the emergency department crying. He cannot bend his left arm after his older sister pulled it. The provider performs an x-ray and shows that the patient has nursemaid's elbow. At that point, the ED provider reduces the elbow successfully, and the patient can move his arm again after the reduction. So what do we think our main term is going to be here? What's the condition? The nursemaid's elbow. Yep. So you'll go to, it's just a phrase, just nursemaid's elbow, and that gives us what code? Yeah. So Sylvia, our sign and symptom is that pain, right? He can't bend it, but the nursemaid's elbow is our definitive diagnosis. So what's our code that we're going to go further expand in the alphabetic index for nursemaid's elbow? S53.03. Yep. So let's go look at S53.03 and see if it needs laterality and all the good things. Okay. So what's our 6th character for our laterality? And then after you find your 6th character for laterality, what is our 7th character? Yep. So letter A for the 7th character, or yeah, for the 7th character, S53.032 for the 6th character, and then letter A. Okay. So we need to now code how did the nursemaid's elbow happen? So now we need to code where the older sister pulled it. So we're going to go to our external causes again. Our main term in the external causes is going to be pulling, because that's how the elbow came out of place, is because it was pulled. What's your question, Puny?
For the first code, how can we look from the index?
You go to nursemaid's elbow.
Just go directly to nursemaid or go on the pain?
No, you'll go to just nursemaids, because the pain is the sign or symptom. So our
Okay.
definitive diagnosis is nursemaid's elbow. Okay. So yes, underneath pulling, it's X 50.9. So letter X as in X-ray, 50.9. And then that's just going to be other and unspecified overexertion or strenuous movement. So just your pulling. And then we have to have seventh character. So we have to use some placeholders. So our code from there is going to be the X50.9 XXA. Okay. Any questions on either the nursemaid's elbow or the external cause? Okay. So we didn't get to 8, 9, or 10. So again, those 3 questions are going to be in the file on the Google Drive. Down at the bottom of the file, you've got, again, your answers and your rationale. So work through those. And then if you have any questions, don't hesitate to throw those in the chats. But anything that you guys have that you want to chat about before we get done for tonight? How are you all feeling about ICD-10? Do you feel any better? So Zinnia, the Google Drive is in the Discord. Underneath Discord, you have a let me pull up Discord here so I can show you exactly where it's at. Underneath Discord, you have a channel for the weekly meetings and files. And then there's a thread underneath that chat or underneath the meeting schedule and files for the weekly study group. And the link for that Google Drive is up at the top. Okay. If you all have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out. I will chat with you guys next Wednesday if I don't chat with you before then. But you all have a good rest of your week and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.